Hi, third graders. Welcome back. If you remember yesterday, we read chapter 3 of the Gasping Garbage, the one that was about Frog Hollow. And we talked about events in their order and temporal words that were showing us the passage of time. So hopefully you enjoyed that temporal word wrap that was posted yesterday, and you enjoyed that. Thinking about words that show the reader that time is passing, right? Or things are possibly happening at the same time. So today we're going to focus a little bit more on the order of events again, thinking about what happened in chapter 3 and now what's happening in chapter 4. So also learning about how characters' actions affect that sequence of events, the order of how things happen. So today we're going to read chapter 4 together, and I wonder if we can even find some more temporal words in this particular section and see if we can add those to our chart. All right, so we're going to start here. Chapter 4 is called To the Rescue. If you remember, we left off, right, and they had made all of those signs. And Chanel said that should do it. So that should stop the problem, right, of the frogs getting squished to try to get to the pond. Chapter 4, To the Rescue. But it didn't. The next day, just as Drake was swirling a solution in a flask, the phone rang. Oh, the next day. Doyle and Fossey, Drake answered. It's just terrible, said Nell. What is? It's just awful. Calm down, naturalist Nell, and tell me what the problem is. It's the road signs. The wind blew them down, and they got all wet. And then the cars ran over them, and no one slowed down. And dozens of frogs have died horrible deaths. Drake frowned. Once again, Nell was right. This was awful. Just awful. What are we going to do? He asked. Call all of our friends, replied Nell. Tell them to tune their radios to 98.4 FM at 10 a.m. Check. Click. Drake made dozens of phone calls. After all, they had lots of friends. Tune your radio to 98.4 FM, 10 a.m. sharp. Check, they answered. Click. Finally, at 10 o'clock, Drake turned on the radio. The announcer was saying, and our guest today is Miss Nell Fossey, nature's naturalist. Now tell us, Miss Fossey, what brings you here today? Frogs. What about frogs? Allow me to explain, said Nell. And so she did. She explained about frogs. She explained her observations. She explained about the pond and the road, the signs, and, of course, the horrible, horrible deaths. And finally, if we want to save our frog population, we must build a culvert. A culvert? The announcer asked. I wonder if any of you know what a culvert is. That's right, a culvert. Dig a tunnel under the road and right out the other side. That way, the frogs can hop through the culvert and they won't have to cross the road. Said the announcer. That sounds expensive. Who's going to pay for this? That's why I'm on the air. Listen up, Mossy Lake. Remember, that's the town they live in. Meet me at the town square at 12 noon tomorrow. We'll rally with signs and take donations. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you, Miss Fossey, for this most delightful interview. My pleasure, she replied. This broadcast brought to you by Mac's Diner. In a hurry? Zip on over to Mac's Diner, the place to squat and gobble, where the service is speedy and the slop ain't bad. Drake flicked off the radio. Great Scott! A culvert! It just might work. Nell was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now, some of you may not know what a culvert is. We have one in Zealand. It's near the football stadium. We'll talk about that in a little bit. At 12 o'clock sharp, Drake met Nell in the town square. Unlike the day before, there's some passage of time. It was a bright, beautiful day with cotton ball clouds and plenty of sunshine. Already dozens of kids were there with their parents. Save the frogs, the sign said. Save the tadpoles. Say yes to the environment. Nell put out a jar for money. The day wore on. Nell gave speeches. She showed charts and graphs. She pointed with her wooden pointer. More and more people gathered. More and more money filled the jar. And then the television news crew came, and the mayor. The mayor gave a speech in front of the cameras. Nell stood beside him. Just this morning, our little town of Mossy Lake was unaware of the problem faced by the leopard frog. Now, thanks to Miss Nell Fousey, Nell spoke into the microphone. Fossey, not Fousey. We can do something about it, the mayor declared. That's right, said Nell. Remember, together we can make a difference. One of the parents stepped forward. I'll help. I'm in the construction business. I'll donate my time for free. And I have a backhoe, someone else offered. It will do the job in a jiffy. They're all pitching in. Here they are. Here's Nell, naturalist Nell. Here's Drake. This must be the mayor. Look at all their signs. There's Dr. Livingston. And I'll bring plenty of sandwiches for everyone, Mrs. Doyle volunteered. Nell spoke into the microphone again. Don't forget the coffee. Decaf, black. The townspeople burst into cheers. The mayor shook Nell's hand. Cameras flashed. Nell was on the evening news and on the front page of the morning paper, where the headline read, Nature's Naturalist Rallies Town. Frogs everywhere croaking with relief. Nell was a hero. A few days later, Drake, Nell, and Dr. Livingston were back at Frog Hollow. Again, Nell had her magnifying glass. She said. A frog hopped by. Follow that frog. Together, Drake and Nell followed the frog with Dr. Livingston close behind. The frog hopped over a log. It hopped around a rock. It hopped through the tall grass. It hopped and hopped and hopped. And then something wonderful happened. The frog hopped through the culvert and out the other side. Ooh, whispered Drake. Beautiful, said Nell. Woof, said Dr. Livingston. That evening, Drake wrote in his lab notebook, Nell brilliant, culvert a success, leopard frogs and future generations saved, payment 0, paid in full. I noticed the very beginning of this chapter, it's showing me the passage of time, right? The next day, just as Drake was swirling a solution in a flask, the phone rang. So it's showing me time, something's happening. So I'm going to write that down on our chart from yesterday. Right, here's what happened. The phone rang, right? And when did it ring? Just as Drake was swirling a solution in a flask. Now, we've talked about solution before. That's a mixture of something, not the answer to a problem, right? And a flask is just some kind of container that he has in his laboratory. So keeping in mind, using words when you're writing that show the passage of time. When you're working on your personal narrative, you'll be able to add some of those in there as well. Now, let's quickly talk today about how we can tell time is passing in our story and how we can tell a little bit about the character's actions, right? So we know time is passing. In chapter 3, well, it was Friday afternoon. In chapter 4, it said the next day. Okay, so you can keep track of what's happening in the story. Thinking about the characters, right? Chapter 3 and chapter 4. Remember, they use 2 chapters to tell this particular story. They do that with every short story in this book, right? So writing things down like this, Friday afternoon, right? And then the next day, that shows me that this author is building, right, on what happened to the next day, right? We're not going backwards. We're building on what happens. And writers like to use chapters to kind of break up stories into parts to keep their readers interested and to kind of help their readers understand the text. So they like to build suspense, right? We were left in chapter 3 with her making the signs, right? Hoping that helped. But then we read the next day that that wasn't helping at all. Indeed, they got blown over, right? So what they did on Friday afternoon had a big impact on what happened the next day, right? Friday afternoon, those big events. I'm going to write down that Nell and Drake made signs right, to save the frogs. But that didn't work, right? So on the next day, chapter 4, right, it's building on that. They did this first. This didn't work, so they had to come up with a second plan, right? The signs blew over, and they had to come up with a new plan. Okay, this is what they did, right? They wanted to save the frogs. That was their motivation. They created those signs. That didn't work, so they had to come up with a new plan, and they decided to build a culvert, right? So they kind of got the townspeople together, the community, and they built a culvert. Okay, and that allowed those frogs then to travel from one spot to the next. Now, I've got a picture of a culvert. If you think about where the football stadium is, if you park at the high school parking lot and you have to walk under a tunnel to get to the football stadium, that's an example of a culvert. That's a really busy road, and it would be hard for people to get from one side to the other with all of that traffic. So instead, they built a culvert. Okay, here's an example of one. This one happens to be, you can see grass on top, so it's under a road. This happens to be built so that water can travel through. But we built ours so that people could travel through them. So it's a tunnel underneath the road. So that's what Nell and Drake organized in order to save those frogs. Okay, so remember, we're always thinking about what are the characters' motivations? Why do they do the things they do? And what are the events that happen? And they build on each other from one chapter to the next. All right. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit about the gasping garbage so far and location, location, location. We're going to kind of compare those two stories in our next reading lesson.